This video shall be an endeavor to look at the climate finance goal, that was the new collective quantified goal on climate finance that was declared in Baku in the COP29 recently, the intricacies that are associated with it, and I shall try to also answer a few interview transcript questions that had arisen on these topics. To get a context, one of the questions was, if the developed countries did not know the impact that the climate change is going to have in the future, then should they really be held accountable for their actions? These are the kind of questions that we shall be tackling. And let's see. So the idea of climate finance is simple. It's that the developed countries owe reparations to the developing countries, because these guys were the historical contributors of climate change, and as a result, these guys have to adapt to the damages that are caused. So, in the Kyoto Protocol, the concept of CBDR was formally agreed between the countries. This means that each of us have the goal of abating climate change, but the larger responsibility lies on the developed countries. Now, the developed countries, so in from the Kyoto Protocol flows the idea of climate finance. The developed countries back in 2009 itself, in COP21, have, I think it's not COP21, but back in 2009 itself, have pledged that they shall be delivering a climate finance of to the tune of $100 billion by 2020. But by the end of 2021, the amount of climate finance that was being released was about $82 billion, and most of it is concentrated in the form of loans and not in the form of grants. Loans are a liability on the receiver, while grants are really something that are given to them, right? So loans create a liability. So are they really climate finance? This was a question before all of us. Now what happened is, in the Paris Agreement itself, it was said that after the global stock take is done, or after the global stock take is done, or periodically, the climate finance shall be increased. Now this emanates out of Article 9 Clause 3 of the Paris Agreement. If you want, you can pause the video and read Article 9 Clause 3, which is written here. But the idea is simple, that whatever new goal on climate finance will be delivered should be a progression beyond the previous effort. Now the developed countries say, since they are tripling the climate finance that was proposed, this indeed is a progression beyond previous efforts, but we shall see how it's not. And in fact, please note that this $300 billion would be by 2035, so they do not have an obligation to provide this $300 billion in the next few years. They have to reach the goal by 2035. In fact, they have already missed in 2020. So what else could happen at 2035? Let's wait and watch. Now, the criticism for the $300 billion emanates from these few points. The first one is, much of the goal will be met with no additional effort. Why are they saying so? So this is the official text of the COP29. Please pause the video and read it. Hope you have read the video. Read the text here. Now look at the wording here. Now, if you are a student of law or from legal background, or if you have ever seen arguments in the agreement sides, one single word is enough to open a whole new dimension. Similarly, here, look at the kind of words that are used here. The $300 billion by 2035 would be out of various sources: public and private, bilateral and multilateral, and alternative sources. So, analysts have identified these kind of financial mechanisms. One is public finance, the other is multilateral development banks, and the other is specialized climate funds, or the funds from the private sector. Now pause for a moment and think about the problems that are associated with this. If the finance is public, this was actually the spirit of CBDR, that the developed countries will be paying the developing countries. Now see, who are the developed countries? It's the government So the coffers of the government should have paid the developing country. So this should have been the major element, or in fact the only element that was providing climate finance. But unfortunately, these two have crept in. Now think about the problems with these two. If we are saying that climate finance should emanate from multilateral development banks, this has few problems. One is, even the developing countries are stakeholders in the multilateral development banks. So are you using their own money to invest in their own cause? That is one problem associated with that. Second is the problem of aid conditionality. Now let's look at other things that have happened. If we look at IMF bailout packages, they always come with some aid, some with some conditions. So similarly, multilateral development banks have these two kind of problems. So they are not really climate finance that trace their origin back to reparations, but just another form of investments. Okay, so this is the problem with involving multilateral development banks. The other is private sector or specialized climate funds. One second. So now this all traces back to a few arguments of the developed countries. Now we all know that the real climate finance that is needed is in the order of trillions and not billions. Billions will not work. But just think from the USA perspective or any developed country. You go and ask them, give us $1 trillion for climate finance. Would they be really giving this? Even though they are morally obliged to do so, would they be giving this? Of course, they have the money to go and spend it in Ukraine and other sectors of the world, but do you think that this kind of things would be accepted in their own public, that $1 trillion are going to be summoned by the USA government to climate aid in climate finance? If any government dares to do so, the next elections would show them their place. So we have to give it to them that trillions of dollars is really not feasible. Or let's not say this in interview, but this is a, ये बात तो हमारे दोनों या हमारे पास होना चाहिए. So their argument is, the developed countries argue that if you want climate finance to the tune of trillions, then we can't be doing so. We need to involve the private sector. Now here, in the negotiations before COP29, developing countries are very clear that their stand is they want only this money. Whatever NCQG that will be formalized in COP29, the developing countries want it to emanate from public finance only, while the developed countries wanted multiple layers of funding. One of the layers is investment. They wanted to count investments from their own people, and the second is what they call public finance, and the third is in the investment they have two kind of investments here. One is provided and the other is mobilized. So what is provided here? If a country directly provides some money in the form of investment. Now investments differ from grants. Investments are, you need to pay them back sometime. So if the country provides some money, let's say for example USA or let's say country X wants to invest in a developing country Y, so it pledges some money, let's say 100 rupees. Now some infrastructure projects start here, and this would crowd in some private players. So this is what they are calling as mobilization. So when the private players come here, they are mobilized. This investment is mobilizing private players, and the developed countries argue that whatever money that is raised through these channels should also be counted in climate finance. I know, I think you can sense the problems that are arising from this kind of finance. Once the private sector is involved, their motive is not saving the planet Earth, but profit. So, will they really invest in some small island developing state? Or will they really invest in a project that would yield a dividend much longer in future and not an immediate? So, then will you call it climate finance? So, this is the first problem associated with that. By broadening the definition of climate finance, the developed countries have opened the floodgates for these kind of problems. The second problem is even the developing country contributions could cover a part of the goal. Why is this so? Let's go back to Article 2.1c. So the I'll tell you the problem emanates with, so developing countries want to focus on this article of Paris Agreement, while the developed countries want to focus on this article. Okay, this is Article 2.1c. You can pause and uh, read the Article 2.1c. It says making finance force consistent with the path towards low greenhouse gas emissions and climate resilient development. So, using this wording, the developed countries argue that the developing countries should also now form part of the climate finance. By inserting this text, there is a high chance that the developing country contributions could also cover a quarter part of the goal. Excuse me. So, this is one more problem associated with the climate finance. It's now opened the floodgates. It had, in fact, the Kyoto Protocol has clearly distinguished developed and developing countries. The developed and the developing countries. Then, the Paris Agreement has created an artificial wall between them by introducing the concept of nationally determined contributions. These are also given to the developing countries. So here the climate action was only with these people. Here climate action involved these people. Now we are going to the next stage. Now COP29 had opened the floodgates to developing countries to start counting their, some of their contributions could theoretically be counted. I'm not saying they will definitely be, but could be, because the text is encourages, if some developing country is partnering with the developed country and are investing somewhere, then they could do some accounting tricks and include this as well. Okay, now I think I've written this and I've lost it. Now, this may not be relevant to the interview, but this is something I found very interesting. A part of this, I'll write, wait. So once you start, you know who is already doing some investments in climate finance. For example, oh shit. How do I increase the size? Yeah. So countries like South Korea are a significant contributor to the global climate fund, or GCF. This is prelims related information. I should see that again. I forgot. So GCF and Chinese BRI, Belt and Road Initiative, also has a lot of so-called climate related projects. Now here there is a larger politics going on here. If the developed countries could rope in China into climate finance, then Chinese BRI would fall under more accountability and transparency norms. So that would be a problem to China. So this is just some brain tease for you. Think about it. If they eventually manage to get the developing countries on board, by developing countries, their main bone of contention here is China. There, this could happen. Now, So this was the second problem that is related with the climate finance. And the third problem, as you guys can guess, is inflation. In fact, somebody calculated that at the rate of 3% inflation, the 2020 goal would have been at the rate of 3% inflation. The 2020 goal of $100 billion would have reached to $217 billion by 2035. So, and this is one more bone of contention that the developing countries argue that the $300 billion does not even account for inflation. So, you tell me if the develop. So now let's come back to the interview transcript questions. If the developed countries are so clever in diverting all of their climate action, do we still need to give them the benefit of doubt that once upon a time they did not know what is happening about climate change? Think about the answer for this. The second, this is the issue of climate finance there. Now, for the kind of answers that we should give, I believe if we could rope in a few key terms from this. For example, if you have to simply say that the $300 billion was not sufficient, you can list out these 3 points that the already pledged climate finance would have taken it to about $230 billion. There is a chance that developing countries could also, uh, since the text was diluted, there is a chance that their contributions could also be a part of the goal. And inflation, these these 3 points should be enough to say that $300 billion are not at all worthy. In fact, India has called the NCQG stage managed. Please note this down if you're even hearing even now. India has called the developing countries' actions as stage managed. It is said that the NCQG discussions did not even take place. So the president of COP29 and a few developed countries were discussing. India, etc., were not even allowed to discuss, and they came onto the stage, and they did it, and they have uh, declared that this is the goal of the COP29. Ms. Chandni Raina, the Indian ambassador to the COP29, was the person that had said that whatever agreement had happened was stage managed. हमारा बात ही नहीं दिया, हमको बात करने का मौका ही नहीं दिया, हमारा बात पे नहीं ध्यान दिया, और अपने आप एक एग्रीमेंट पे दे एग्रीड एंड दे हैव कम एंड said that they have come on the last day of the COP29, they have come and declared that this is the official text of COP29. So this is what happened there. So the thing is, it is violative of Article 9.3. So the last 3 points have proved that they are not at all a progression beyond previous effort. It is also a violation of Article 9 Clause 2 that the developing countries should contribute voluntarily. So, in whatever happened at COP29 is not tripling of resources, but uh, but a complete disgrace of the Paris Agreement itself. Now, one question was asked to me in a one-on-one: should India do for climate finance now? And you could use Article 9.1.2 and 9.9.2 to say that India doesn't need to do climate finance as a moral obligation, but if it wants to leverage its soft power or increase, show its big brotherly attitude or its idea of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, it could do so. But India doesn't need to do as per Article 9, Clause 1 and Clause 2 of the Paris Agreement. So this is what happened. If you still have some interest left in listening to my monologue, then one more interesting thing I've learned is Why did it? Why is there so much ruckus? No consensus in the developed countries about the $300 billion. It's because in the $300 billion, who must pay who how much is not defined by them, determined between them. Countries like USA, why did this second point emerge here? Countries like USA want China to also contribute in climate finance. They argue that whatever realities of 1992 and realities of 2024 are completely different. The China today is much better than a lot of Annex 1 countries of 1992. So it makes sense. The argument of USA might make sense in one angle, but if there is a report by Carbon Brief itself, if you compare the per capita emissions and per capita income, China still ranks bit below all the Annex 1 countries, except one, I think, all the Annex 1 countries. So purely from the point of view of climate finance, even though 1992 and 2024 geopolitical realities are different, from the point of view of climate finance, nothing much should have changed ideally. If you want to know more about this, please go and read uh, Josh Gabatis from Carbon Brief. All of my all of this video is based on his articles only. Thank you, and in the next one, I shall be discussing other highlights of COP29. But this is the major highlight. Okay. Climate finance is the major highlight. And I hope you got the answer. You can now think broadly about other interview transcript related questions. We shall discuss them soon. Thank you.